All right, we are ready to go. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. I am Tiffany Muller, president of In Citizens United and Let America Vote, and we are thrilled to have you all here with us today. And I'm thrilled to be joined by these amazing participants. First, we have Congressman Jason Crowe, Senator Michael Bennet, and Owen Perkins, who runs CleanSlateNow Institute in Colorado. And like all of you, I watched with horror to what happened to our Capitol on January 6th. And we know that that came about not just because we had seen 6 months of attacks on our democracy, but really because we've seen attacks on our democracy over decades. And, you know, frankly, Washington has never been more broken. People are doubting elections. That we have big money pouring into our elections at unprecedented rates. We have 165 bills across the country introduced right now to roll back voting rights. And the special interests, frankly, have too big of a seat at the table, and it's stopping us from making progress on so many issues. So now is the moment. We have an opportunity, and we must actually confront this crisis that we're in. And that includes passing the For the People Act, the most transformational set of democracy reforms that we have seen in generations, to reduce the influence of money in politics, to make sure that everyone has the right and the access to vote, to make sure that public officials are serving the public good and not themselves, and to get rid of gerrymandering and make sure that maps are drawn where voters get to choose their elected officials rather than the other way around. These are the kind of changes that everyone wants, that will benefit everyone, no matter what your party affiliation is. So today we're here with champions on this issue. First, Senator Bennett. He's been fighting against the Citizens United decision since he got to the Senate. He leads the effort in the Senate to pass the constitutional amendment that we need in order to overturn Citizens United. And he's been one of the leading senators on a number of reforms, from ending dark money to ending gerrymandering. And during his presidential campaign, he was one of our, what we refer to as reform first candidates, someone who had pledged that he would focus on making the system work for the people again first, so we can make progress on all the other issues. Then we have Congressman Jason Crowe, who is one of the leaders of the 2018 class House candidates. Let's try that again. He was one of the leaders of that 2018 class who helped flip the House in 2018. And we were thrilled. He was actually one of our very first endorsements that cycle. And it's because he's been leading on these issues. He doesn't take a dime from corporate PACs. He organized a letter with his cohorts that year to actually say that comprehensive democracy reform was one of the very first things that needed to get done. And then he pushed to make that happen and to make it be H.R. 1, the For the People Act, in 2019. And additionally, the very first bill that he introduced was a bill called the End Dark Money Act, which we will actually talk about here in a little bit. And then we're so glad to also have Owen Perkins from CleanSlateNow Institute. They're working at the local, state, and national level to pass comprehensive reforms, eliminate the corrupting influence of big money in politics. And he and his team started their work in Colorado, but they're pushing for reforms in all 50 states. And we're so glad to have him here with us and to work together. So I'm excited that you all are here. We have a lot to talk about, a lot of great, exciting opportunities. But like I said, we're also at this moment of crisis. We're seeing these voting rights attacks prop up across the nation right now. 165 bills introduced in 33 states, including, this is a great segue, right there in Colorado, which really considers itself a model of access and is really what most states are trying to follow when they're trying to figure out how to make it easier to vote. So Senator Bennett and Congressman Crowe, I'm going to ask you two questions. One, tell us about those efforts to roll back voting rights there in Colorado, but also tell us why we need to pass the For the People Act and what you think it would do to help our system. And so, Senator, I'll start with you.
I wanted to start with Jason. Is that all right?
Okay. Of course.
Well, Senator, he gets to
Crowe.
decide. I can't say
Jason
no.
Crowe on this stuff because he represents, you know, a swing district in a swing state, and there's a reason why he supports this stuff. You're going to hear about it. but it is popular with people, you know, no matter what party affiliation they're in. So anyway, I wanted to give you the first crack at it, if that's all right.
Thanks, Senator. I appreciate it. And thank you to Tiffany and Citizens United and Let America Vote for the work you've done really for years on this issue. And the proof, Tiffany, that you and ECU and Let America Vote are doing good things is that there are people that are mad about what you're doing, which means in this town, that's usually a sign that you're making some necessary change and making progress with things. And of course, Owen, my longtime friend and advocate, and the CleanSlateNow Institute, really a pleasure to work with you in tandem on this to highlight the issues you've been doing, particularly at the state and municipal level, as well as some of the things that are happening in my district as well, which I'm sure you'll talk about. Why I think this is important, I just want to start at a very broad level here. Very early on in my career in elected office, actually before I was elected, when I was campaigning, I was out in the community and talking to folks. And I remember very vividly one of my first interactions was with a woman. Knocked on her door and kind of gave her my pitch and talked about, you know, what I was trying to achieve. And I remember her response. She said, "Well, you seem like a really nice guy. And I really love your background, but you'll just be like all the others. You know, the system is just too much for you to handle and overcome." And that interaction just really struck me, right? Here you have this woman who is just trying to, you know, raise a family, pay for her home, work her job, and she just felt like the system had overcome everything, and that no one person could you know, overcome that. And you know, she wasn't necessarily wrong in that you know, that cynicism almost that she had, that there are so many forces out there and so many promises that have been made and broken by people over so many years that she was starting to resign herself to it. And that struck out to me because you know, democracy can't survive if people don't have confidence in the system. If good people can't stand up and lead and impact change or be responsive to the electorate. So that's why I've decided to make structural democracy reform, campaign finance reform, gerrymandering reform, ethics reform, really the preeminent effort, because whether you're talking about climate change, healthcare, immigration, all of these issues, we're not doing the big and important things anymore because of the structural barriers. And that's why HR 1 is so important. And that's why my End Dark Money Act is so important, because if you want to change business in this town, you start by turning off the spigot of dark money and ending gerrymandering, and you would radically alter the landscape.
And it's hard to improve on that answer, but let me take a crack at it. I think on January 6th, there are a lot of people who are worried about the future of our democracy. I've been worried about it for more than a decade. And the answer is, it's up to us. It is up to us. There is nobody that's going to ride to the rescue. And our democracy will succeed or fail based on our ability to be citizens and to give it the energy that it needs. So Donald Trump's presidency, I view as an invitation for us to strengthen our democracy. We now know what it looks like when you have a president who's actively trying to suppress the vote. We now know what it looks like, as Tiffany said, when there are places all over the country that are trying to pass things to restrict the vote. You mentioned Colorado, where we're very proud of the system that we have. There are legislators right now that are trying to roll back the mail ballots there. Never been evidence of any fraud of any kind, notwithstanding what Donald Trump says. And we have the second highest voter turnout in the country, largely because of the system of voting. We should be making it easier, not harder, to people to vote. And that's why we need the For the People Act, which would be the most significant proposal to strengthen our democracy in a generation. And to go to Jason's point also, he and I think about these things so similarly. You know, it is really easy to avert your eyes at a moment like this and say it's too much trouble, it'll never change, it's all the same, you'll be the same kind of politician. If that were the approach prior generations had taken, women would never have gotten the right to vote. You know, and that progressive era actually started with a fight to get women the right to vote and a fight to end the corrupt practice of people like, so-called senators bribing their way through state legislatures to get to the United States Senate because they were then appointed by legislatures, not directly elected. Those were big changes to our constitutional framework, much bigger, I would argue, than what we're talking about in the For the People Act, which, first of all, would just make it a lot easier for Americans across the country to vote. In many ways, by drawing on our example in Colorado, where we've got automatic voter registration, early voting, and vote by mail. As I said, we've got a 76% turnout rate among eligible voters in the last election. We would change the country's future if we were at 76% versus at 50%. I was asked once, by the way, thanks for noticing that I ran for president, Tiffany. Almost nobody did, but I'm grateful for it. And when I was in Iowa, a woman asked me, can Western democracy solve climate change? I said, you've asked the most existential question that there is, and we can, but we're much likelier to do it if we've got a 76% turnout instead of a 40% turnout or a 45% turnout. So we should be making it easier for people to vote instead of making it harder for people to vote. Second, the bill takes on the flood of money in politics, which Jason has been so critical in, and Owen as well. 96% of Americans think there's too much money in our politics. They're right. Some estimates show spending in the 2020 elections exceeded $14 billion, which was more than twice the previous record. This is a direct result of Citizens United. It's created a corruption of inaction where Congress doesn't do things for fear that some billionaire is going to interfere in your primary if you go against them. The American people can't even see that, which is why End Citizens United is so important, the work that your group is doing. And this bill would require dark money groups to disclose their biggest donors, crack down the coordination between super PACs and campaigns, finally fix the freaking Federal Election Commission, which is broken by design, and it would create a system that matches the contributions of small donors. So it's driving the money out of politics and bringing people back in. And then, and I just think it would be so, Donald, I'll finish with this, and I know Owen's got something. Donald Trump said he wanted to drain the swamp. He never did. He made it worse. We have the chance to drain the swamp. And I think we should. And I think we could go to every district in Colorado and not just defend that action, but celebrate that action. Took money out of our politics and put people back in. And that's why this is also important to me.
Yeah, this is really pretty simple. This is about who gets to have a voice in our democracy, who gets to have that seat at the table, how big is that seat going to be? And this bill, the entire purpose of this bill is to give that power back to the people. Senator, your climate change is always one that I just find so striking, because prior to the Citizens United ruling, there had been 14 instances of Senate Republicans joining with Senate Democrats to try to fix the climate change crisis that we're under. And since the Citizens United 11 years ago, there have been zero.
Right.
Zero. Right. And that's all because of the money that the oil and gas lobbies spend in our elections, and the lobbying money that they spend, and the fear that you talked about that silences people. So we have to break that tie between the money and the public policy outcomes, because right now it's driving way too much of the agenda. Owen, I want to make sure that you get in on this. Can you talk about, we were talking a little bit about the proposals even right there in Colorado, and how much of a leader Colorado is on voting. And I always love when I do these events with folks from Minnesota, because they're always so happy to brag about how they're the #1 turnout state in the country. But can you talk about how Colorado is really a leader, and looking forward, what's the way forward for protecting the right to vote?
Yeah, well, I think, Colorado has led on a lot of fronts always, long before marijuana, which we get a lot of attention for, but, and beyond politics. But politically, and looking at elections and campaign finance reform, almost everything that's in HR 1 has some precedent at play in Colorado. And just for a quick perspective, I mean, in the last 3 years, of the 3 preceding years, we had in 2018, Denver passed major reform with the Democracy for the People Initiative, which became the Fair Elections Act. In 2019, Lakewood passed major reform. In 2020, Aurora, which had been the Wild West with no regulations virtually at all, went through major campaign finance reform. And in 2021, this year, Fort Collins is working on it, looking at publicly financed elections. That's for the 5 biggest cities in Colorado that over the past 4 years have either 3 in a row passed them or the 4th looking at, you know, some significant changes now. All of these with 70% approval or higher. And that there's a trend in Colorado that we've seen. I hope we see this spread to ban corporations. All of these reforms have banned corporations from directly contributing to campaigns. We've had campaign finance reform as early as in the early 2000s in Colorado and set relatively low limits for our statewide office. And we often get reminded as a result that we were able to pass some significant legislation along the way, including big gun safety legislation in 2013 in reaction to the theater shooting in Aurora. We've had that improved access that Senator Bennett talked about with same-day registration and vote by mail and automatic registration for voters. Return to paper ballots after 2006. Disclosure has been highlighted at every level, local and statewide. All those reforms starting in 2017 have included major disclosure pieces in their legislation to get rid of dark money, essentially. And we're really doing, you talked, Tiffany, about getting power back to the people. We're really working to get citizen-owned elections again. You know, I think that was part of the frustration for everybody on January 6th was the sense that things are out of our control. Our elections are out of our control, and wanting to have ownership of that again, wanting to bring it back into that sense of a democracy. Denver's Fair Elections Act was modeled after an early version of H.R. 1, and we have 9-to-1 public match for candidates who opt in and give up PAC and special interest money and thereby get a match on contributions up to $50. And that means a candidate who runs a clean campaign with no PAC or special interest money can take a $50 contribution and end up with more money out of that than a candidate who's not opting in and takes the new maximum of $400 for a candidate. We did the fair maps at the statewide, taking gerrymandering or taking redistricting out of the hands of politicians. All these reforms also added teeth, real teeth to the penalties. It used to just be in Colorado and in municipalities that the cost of taking an illegal contribution was something like $50. And you might be talking about a $5,000 contribution. It's now many places are enacting legislation where it's 2 or 3 times the value of the contribution. So if you're going to accept $5,000 illegally, you could be liable for a $15,000 fine for that. That's no longer the cost of doing business. And lastly, I'd say that these reforms, they're all able to, the ones that have public financing are able to address the self-financing candidates by holding them accountable to the same standards as everybody else if they opt in for that public financing. And I'll just close by saying that the result of what we've seen in Colorado, anybody watching, has seen us shift from a purple state. And I think we're all still hesitant to call ourselves anything but purple, but we've been pretty damn blue lately. And we recently in 2018, the last time we had statewide offices up for election, treasurer, attorney general, and secretary of state, Democrats won all 3 of those for the first time in 80 years. So you're starting to see a shift when you enact these reforms and you get a government that's accountable to the population that's electing them, and that population invested in their elections and knowing they make a difference and participating as a result. They're starting to get elected officials who really represent them and reflect their values, and we see that shift at every level. I think Colorado, I'm hoping, is marking a shift that we'll see at the national level as we start to take on some of these reforms and give our elections back to the people.
Well, Owen, you brought up a really good one. I mean, you brought up so many really good points, but one that I wanted to really follow up on was the the independent redistricting maps that from 2018. And Senator, you then introduced the Fair Maps Act that same year in the Senate, and HR 1 and S1 includes independent redistricting commissions for states across the country. Why is ending partisan gerrymandering so important?
I mean, so we can get the representation we truly deserve. As you said earlier, Tiffany, voters should choose their politicians, not the other way around. And we've got a pretty closely divided country, but somehow 90% of Jason's colleagues in the House are reliably reelected every 2 years. I said it earlier and I'll say it again. I think that the reason why Jason is so responsive to his constituents, both from a policy perspective, but also through the constituent service that he does, is that it's a tough district, you know, and when he ran and won it, he beat an incumbent Republican to win that seat. And I think that's the way it should be. I don't think people should start their elections knowing that they're guaranteed to win because of the gerrymandered nature of the district, or even worse, because they're vulnerable just to the right wing or the left wing of their party, you know, in a primary, which is what we're seeing more and more often, because these politicians have drawn themselves into safe districts where they face no competition from the other party. They are deeply worried about being faced by somebody very extreme in their own party, because our turnout is not what it should be, because we've made it hard for people to vote. And that's driving a lot of the extremism and dysfunction in Washington, D.C. And it's one of the reasons why, you know, Jason has people in his chamber who, you know, wouldn't get elected to many things because of the conspiracy theories that they believe. So I think elections are the mechanism for accountability and representation in our democracy. And when districts are drawn to benefit, to elevate certain voices and not others, it degrades that vital role of accountability and representation. So that's what the Fair Maps Act was all about in 2018, which was when I wrote it, was the first federal legislation ever to explicitly ban partisan gerrymandering. And I'm really glad that the For the People Act includes provisions from my bill, and just another reason why we've got to get it passed. And another place, as Owen was saying, where Colorado really has led the way.
Absolutely. We would all be better off if we were following Colorado's example. And Congressman, I mean, there is no doubt about it. You ran and won a tough election in 2018, and it keeps you very responsive to the people. But also just the kindness and compassion and empathy of which you work every day on behalf of your constituents. I just applaud you for that. And I think we all got a chance to see that on January 6th. And so this question is to both you and the senator, but I'll start with you, Congressman. What signal did the events of January 6th really send to the world, and what can we do to restore the example of America's leadership as a global beacon for democracy? And again, I just want to also thank you for your leadership that day and your courage that day.
Thanks, Tiffany. I appreciate that. I apparently have to move around more because I have motion sensor lights in my office that go off. I'm trying to reduce my carbon footprint, so I'll move. If I wave my arms around, it's because I'm trying to keep the lights on. No, I appreciate that. I couldn't agree more with my colleague Senator Bennett here that January 6th didn't come out of nowhere, right? If you think about the bonfire, the raging bonfire that was January 6th. You were building that. You were piling the wood on over a period of time. Whether it's gerrymandering is one piece of wood, money in politics is another, hyper-partisanship is another, economic anxiety is another, non-responsiveness of elected officials, and then you had President Trump that poured gasoline on it and lit that match, and there you go, and that's how it kind of came together. But you have all these confluence of factors, and Senator Bennet just talked about the issue of gerrymandering. And from a perspective of somebody like me that represents a purple district where I have, almost as many Republicans as Democrats, what I see day to day is a community conversation. People trying to get to the best result, because guess what? I'm not always right. No one party has a monopoly on being right all the time. There's a lot of good ideas out there, and democracy's premised on this idea that it's supposed to be a marketplace of ideas, a push and pull between competing ideas, and then we arrive at the best one. But we have the discussion and the debate. And if you have a situation where you have a deep blue we have deep blue districts, all the blue districts are deep blue, all the red districts are deep red, everyone's thinking the same within all the districts, you're not having that conversation, right? Because there's no incentive for those elected officials to try to step across and step out of their respective echo chambers and have a discussion. And I don't know of any healthy organization, whether it's a political party, whether it's a government, whether it's a business, whether it's a nonprofit. I know of no healthy organization where everybody's thinking the same, right? It just doesn't happen, right? You need to have dissenting voices. You need to have a conversation. So that's really what this is about, is what kind of democracy, what kind of a nation do we want to have? And that's why gerrymandering has been so corrosive, and why it's so important that we break it down so that we can have that conversation again. Because January 6th was a great illustration of that. It kind of all came to a head, but you see elements of that happening throughout our country and community everywhere you go now.
And Senator, I know you have to leave us in like 1 minute. So do you want to give some parting remarks and leave on any comments with what Congressman Crowe just said?
Yeah, let me just jump off where Jason was kind of ended, where he said no organization, no organization all comes to the same conclusion or thinks about things the same way. And I can say that from a very personal standpoint, the worst decisions I make are the ones I make at home alone in my basement, not contending with someone else's point of view, not contending with somebody else's experience, not contending with someone else's experience. And that is what a democracy is supposed to be about. The founders didn't set this up believing we would agree with each other. They believed that we would disagree with each other. They had disagreements among themselves. And they thought out of those disagreements, as Jason was saying, you get the best idea. Or as I like to say, you get a more imaginative and durable result than what any king or tyrant might come up with, because it reflects the people's sentiment, not a shabby compromise, of moderate split the difference between both parties, so everybody can go home, but an imaginative decision and a durable decision. And that's what we've lost in our democracy. I think what for the moment at the national level, and I think the 6 showed that our democracy is at risk, like any other democracy. I remember standing there in that room where they took us away from the floor, watching the people climb up the scaffolding of the nation's capital, thinking to myself, I grew up and came, and became an adult watching that on TV, but it happened in other countries. It was unthinkable that it could happen in the United States. But the amazing thing was most other countries and other democracies, if they have a January 6th, they don't have a January 20th. And we had a January 20th. And the reason we had a January 20th, among other reasons, is the so-called least dangerous branch of government, the judicial branch, did their job all the way through, including judges appointed by Donald Trump 60 times. They did their job. It's because the Secretary of State in Georgia said no to a tyrant, and the same thing from the Secretary of State in Arizona. And so none of that should make us feel at ease. And what we should be is inspired by the people, sadly not in my chamber, many of them, by the people who did their jobs at the state and local level and in the federal courts to hold up our democracy. Now it's our job to strengthen the democracy in the wake of the attack And that's what this bill is all about, and that's why it's got to be an urgent order of business in this Congress. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you
So
for
long,
joining
Jason.
us.
Thanks.
And thank you for your leadership. And you know, I think the senator is exactly right. We saw how fragile our democracy was and how it took just these individual courageous people who stood up against massive amounts of pressure to really thwart efforts to undermine our elections. And we have a chance now to make sure that the actual structural pieces are really strengthened. And Congressman, going back to January 6th, what we've seen since then is a lot, of different looking at how we can strengthen our democracy. And of course, we've also seen corporations announce that they're pausing donations or they're not giving to certain members of Congress, but our system still allows in pretty unlimited corporate funds into our elections. You are one of the members who has taken a real leadership role on this and pledged not to accept any corporate PAC money. Why is that important? And what do we need to do to make sure that people have as equal of a voice at our table as big special interest?
Yeah, it's important because, first of all, we just need to have legislation that prevents that practice, right? As Owen mentioned before, right? Like corporations shouldn't be influencing votes. People should be deciding their elected officials. But notwithstanding the need for legislation, I asked myself, what could I just do voluntarily to show that I'm willing to lead on this, right? What are the actions that I can do to be transparent, to be open, and to live my values? I was one of the first candidates in 2018 and led the pledge letter along with others to say I'm not going to take corporate PAC money because I represent my constituents, not companies, I still listen to folks, right? I have meetings all the time because and people come in and I listen to businesses, I listen to companies, I listen to different industries, try to get the best result, right? Because I want to weigh legislation based on the merits of the legislation and the impact that they'll have on the community that I represent, and not whether or not somebody wrote me a $10,000 check, right? I don't care what people say, but of course, there's pressure there, right? If you're getting $10,000, $5,000 corporate PAC check, how can that not be some pressure? That's just common sense. So I just didn't want that pressure. I didn't want the appearance of it. I didn't want the reality of it. So I just said, no, I'm not going to do it. And it's actually been extremely liberating because I'll go in, I'll have meetings with folks, constituents, industry groups, whatever. I'll hear everyone out. And then I'll make a decision based on what's in the best interest of my community and constituents, period. So it's been really good for me. And then the second thing I did voluntarily was I'm one of the few members of Congress that actually publishes my meeting schedule online. So you can go to my webpage, crowe.house.gov, and see everybody that comes in to talk to me. And this was obviously before the pandemic when we used to have these office meetings and such. But I also firmly believe that transparency is really important. Right? Because the people that I represent deserve to know who's coming to talk to me in this office, because this is their office, it's not my office. So it also means that I should be willing to answer why people come in to talk to me. If people want to have an idea, they want to know why a group came in and talked to me, it's public, they can ask me and I'll tell them why, and I'll answer it, because that's what they deserve to have in their representative is full transparency. So that's why these measures are so really important, and why I think you're seeing an expansion of this, because people are starting to demand it, right? We're setting a new standard that is now expected of more and more people, and it's a movement that's growing.
Yeah, and this is really all about how we know people are questioning who government works for. We know they don't trust it right now. This is all about restoring faith and trust in our government and in our elected officials. And we can do that both through passing good legislation like For the People Act and through some of the additional efforts that like you've done and the leadership that you've shown. So thank you. It's always so lovely to get to do these events with you and talk about your leadership over the years and to see how far this issue has come. So Owen, we were talking about dark money, and your organizations really led the charge to rein that in, particularly there in Colorado. And we were talking about this before we went live, but in 2018, just for Colorado state elections, there was more than $82 million spent by super PACs, and 80% of that money came from sources that couldn't be traced, which is just crazy to me. So what is that? Probably over 60 million of it. The next year, you all passed the Clean Campaign Act. How do you think that's going to influence future elections, and what are you hoping it'll do?
Sorry. Yeah, I think that disclosure and that transparency that both Congressman Crowe and Senator Bennett have been talking about, I think, is part of what was behind the Clean Campaign Act, and something that people are demanding. And the Clean Campaign Act attempts to deliver that, as did all the recent reforms that we saw on the municipal levels that I've talked about, already today. And that's so much of trying to shine a light on that money. We find time and time again, when the sources of that money are put out there, it can change the course of an election. One of the things Clean Slate does is we publish where everybody's contributions come from. Everything that they have to report, we try to get that up there on our website, so you can see, who is taking money from individuals, who's taking money from PAC after PAC and special interest groups and corporations when those were allowed. And just that list, I mean, there've been people who broke the internet with their contribution lists from special interests, recently defeated U.S. Senator in Colorado. When people see that and see where that money is coming from, it changes their knowledge about that candidate. It changes their impression, and it sometimes changes their vote. And the people are getting more and more intelligent about money in politics. It is the #1 issue consistently that upsets people about politics, is the big money in it. And they know what to look for, and they know how to respond when they find it. So we're getting more and more legislation that enables that, that light to be shown. And we're doing things like, the Clean Campaign Act of 2019. Among the things that it does, well, one, it connects the dots between independent expenditure committees, which is where most of that money you talked about is going, and candidates who are running for office. And it makes a clearer distinction and draws some lines about, you can't just set up these committees and then dissociate yourself from them as soon as you become a candidate. It draws the connection, and it says, if you've established one of those committees within a certain time frame, you're liable for that. But it also, I think the big focus of it is to put disclaimers out there, and to more carefully and thoroughly document in the public advertising, the communications, the things that most of the public is getting their information from, advertisements on TV and radio, and increasingly on digital platforms, requiring disclosure be included as part of that. So not only that kind of paid for statement that it's paid for by such and such a committee, but those committees, have generally been just a title that sounds attractive and hides the real nature of the donors behind it. So now they usually, in most of these reforms, they also have to reveal who are the top donors to those committees in that communication. So when you get that simultaneous ability to follow the money and not have to do your own research and track it down, but when that's up front, however it gets there, when people can see where the money's coming from, it changes their impression of the candidate. It strengthens, it clarifies the candidate, who the candidate is. And, and that enables people to make more informed decisions. And I think that's, that's the kind of thing we've seen play out in elections recently, and hope to see increasingly as we move forward, more and more better informed decisions, with knowing really who is paying for this candidate, who's paying for this election, whose rights, whose interests are we looking at, the public interest or the special interests.
Yeah, absolutely. Transparency leads to accountability, and without transparency, we can't have that accountability. And Congressman, you, again, your very first bill that you introduced was the End Dark Money Act, and it is in the For the People Act. So can you tell everyone about that and why it's such an important part of the reforms we need?
Yeah, I'm very excited about this. So the End Dark Money Act was the first bill I ever introduced as a member of Congress. And I've made a promise it's going to continue to, it's the first bill I introduced in 2019. And it was the first bill I introduced last month too, to start off the new Congress. And I'm going to keep introducing this bill until it gets passed. So I really hope it gets passed now, so I can introduce other bills as my first bill. But it's very simple. It's only a couple of dozen words. And the beauty of this is it actually just says, let's enforce the law, right? Because I believe in actually just enforcing the law. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's not making up anything magical here. So here's what's happening. The IRS rules, the law says you can't use 501c4 organizations to funnel this dark money. But what Congresses in the past have done, some of my GOP colleagues have done, is they put what's called a rider in the IRS rules, a rider. And what a rider does is basically says you can't spend any money to enforce something, right? So there's this rider in the IRS regs or in the law that says you can't actually enforce this, use any money in the Treasury to enforce this 501c4 prohibition. So it lifts that rider, will allow the IRS to actually make rules and enforce the existing law to prevent these 501c4 organizations from being abused to funnel dark money. So that's what the bill does. It's very common sense. It's just enforcing existing law, and it would actually make a really big difference and help clean up one of the avenues of this dark money that flows into our system. I think maybe have we lost you, Tiffany?
Uh-oh.
I just, oh no, am I?
Oh yeah, you're frozen.
Frozen, but there you are.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, well, we are coming to the end, so I will skip to the next question, which is that Eric in Boulder had a great final question for us, which is, what should everyone listening do next, who's listening to this and people they talk to, what can they do to ensure that the People Act is signed into law? And Owen, I'll start with you.
Well, I think, Jason made a great point just now about his bill and introducing it year after year until it passes. And I want to make a quick note that Jason and I go back, I think, about 11 years or so, and we started a public policy committee here in Colorado to, address issues that come up between elections. And we figured that's what people really cared about. And I think everybody participating today and asking questions like that are here because of that reason, because they care about the things that happen between the elections and the policies and trying to change our country for the better as we go. So this is an opportunity, a year like this, to really be focusing on those sorts of things. And I think it's just so vitally important, that idea of trying over and over again to remember that, very few things pass right away. This has been in front of Congress for years, this, variations of this bill. This is your democracy, everybody participating here, and it's your moment. This is the best chance we've had to pass it. And I know there've been a lot of questions about, can it pass? It can. And what we have to do is, the same old thing. We have to contact Congress members, both in the House, where there are 223 co-sponsors right now, and in the Senate, where they're gearing up to consider it in the Senate. We don't know exactly who's leading and who's sponsoring in the Senate, but they all need to hear from us, whether they're supporting it or whether they're opposing it and seem like there's no chance this person would ever stand up, and switch their vote. The people believe in this. The people believe in these values. The people believe in getting big money out of politics, reclaiming their elections, getting back onto the playing field themselves, taking their own role. And we need to make sure that the elected officials are hearing from those constituents. And whether they change their mind or not, they've got to know and hear over and over again that this matters. This may be my top issue, maybe I think of climate change as my top issue. Maybe I think of education as my top issue. Maybe I think of healthcare as my top issue. Whatever my top issue is, it's dominated by campaign finance and by how these elections are paid for. So your elected officials and your candidates need to hear from you now. You need to get them on the record before elections and hold them accountable after elections. But, you know, in this case, they need to hear you want their vote on the right side of this HR 1 bill, passing HR 1, and that you're paying attention and you're going to hold them accountable after the fact. That's part of HR 1 is accountability, but it starts with us, as everybody has said. We have to hold our elected officials accountable. So contact them, and we will, on our website at CleanSlateNowAction.org, list ways that people can contact their congresspeople and let them hear, especially in the House this week, because I don't think we've mentioned it's going to a vote next week in the House. So we want to get some timely calls and emails in right now.
That's a good point. We haven't mentioned that. We put it on next week. So Congressman, what can people do?
Yeah, so first off, there are things that your elected representatives can do tomorrow, right? That they can just do, right? There doesn't require any law, doesn't require any rulemaking. They can just decide to do it. Like the no corporate PAC pledge in the transparency of your schedule, posting publicly the meeting schedule, because those things they help restore trust. They increase transparency. They actually relieve pressures on elected officials to just start doing the right thing and take better votes. So ask your elected representatives to do those things because they can't give you any excuse other than I don't want to, right? Like that's it, right? So like that's one thing. The other is this drumbeat of, and Owen mentioned this earlier, this drumbeat of transparency and kind of real-time response of following the money actually does have an impact, right? It does. And if you keep on furthering this drumbeat of showing where this money is coming from, then it starts this kind of seep into the public consciousness over time. And I think it's having an impact. I actually believe, as difficult as January 6th was, and as hyper-partisan as this town can be and the environment we're in, I actually believe we are moving in the right direction. I believe that public sentiment and momentum is on our side on this issue generally. But it only moves that way when it's pushed, right? When people push it, it's not moving there on its own. It moves there because people push it. And I think that's really important. So those are kind of two things I would say. And I don't know if Tiffany is, I'm sorry, did you have something else, Owen? Because I've been asked to close this out, I think, since Tiffany's connection is bad. But yeah, I think we still have some time. What else do you have?
I just would add, just on the role that one person can play and one elected official like Jason, turning down corporate PAC money. And that's become a movement of people turning down corporate PAC money. And I just wanted to note that Clean Slate Now was founded by Ken Gordon, state senator and state representative, who when he ran for office 15 or 20 years ago and won, he was the only person elected who had done it without PAC money, who had gotten elected without taking any PAC contributions. He wanted to represent individuals. Now, through the result of his efforts ongoing after his death, we're seeing in Denver, for example, every candidate who has filed to run in 2023, the next cycle, has pledged, has opted in for public financing and is giving up any kind of PAC or special interest money. So we had hoped we could get 10 or 20%. So far, we've got 100% of candidates in Denver. And that's the impact that first pebble, that first ripple can have on these waters. So thank you, Jason, for being part of that movement.
Yeah, well, thank you, Owen, and thank you for your longtime friendship. Harkening way back, as you mentioned, to our Public Policy Committee, we've come a long way, but the spirit of that remains the same, that we actually just get together and discuss, really complicated and tough issues. So we'll keep the conversation going. So Tiffany, I think, lost her connections. I've been asked to close it out. And I can tell you, I am no Tiffany Muller. That is for sure. But I will do my best. I really appreciate again in Citizens United for the advocacy work, their reform work. Let America Vote as well. CleanSlateNow, and Owen for your commitment to this issue at every level. So thank you all, and we're just going to get it done. We're gonna push hard. Let's pass HR 1. Let's keep the pressure on the Senate to pass it, and on President Biden to do the same, to sign it, because that's really what we need to do. We need to overcome these structural barriers to our democracy to address all the other very pressing issues that we have. So thank you to everybody. Thank you to all of those who joined tonight as well. Take care.
Thanks. Take care.